Dr. David Hilson is mostly known internationally as the risk doctor. So hopefully we're not too sick.
We'll see.
We'll see. So with no further ado, I'd like to give you the floor.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So I'm going to wear this in the Madonna style. Okay, and this is for the folks overseas. So I hope you can hear me. I shall look for a wave. Can you hear okay?
Yes, but not see you.
You can't see me, okay. All right, I don't usually use a microphone for a small room, but it's because we're not just here in Stockholm, we're all over the world, as you know, which is a very interesting way of presenting. So thank you very much for inviting me. I was last in Stockholm in March, doing some work with Skanska, and I work in, I think, 45 countries, every continent except the Antarctic. It's far too cold, but here is cold as well. So next week I'm going to Miami to warm up for work, of course, you understand. And we have offices in Australia, in South Africa, in Taipei, Dubai, all nice warm places. And then also in Toronto, Los Angeles, and I'm based in the UK. And Risk Doctor and Partners is a small consultancy. All we do is risk management. I started, as Nicholas said, 25 years ago when I was very, very small, only about a small boy. It's been very interesting, and I've worked in lots of different industries, lots of different sectors. I'm pleased to be here to share with you some ideas today. And I have a session with you this morning. We're going to spend about 45 minutes or so talking about this topic, managing risk in projects, what's new. And I'm going to share the same kinds of ideas this afternoon with the controllers, and then spend a day with them having a full-day workshop in order to explore some of the issues in more detail. And the goal, the aim, is to help you to understand that what you're doing is risky, but risk is not necessarily a bad thing. And that risk, if we understand it and see it and exploit it, can help us to create more advantage, to do things differently, more creatively, innovatively, and to do things that we wouldn't do otherwise if we didn't understand the risks. Everybody plans to succeed, especially in our projects, and when we don't succeed, it's because of things that we didn't plan for, the things that we might call risks, that if we had seen and was able to position ourselves in advance and prepare for them, then maybe those things that caused us to fail wouldn't have happened, or we would have been ready for them and we'd have managed them in some other way. So risk and failure, or risk and success, are very closely connected. And my view is that if we manage risk successfully, then we'll be more successful in our project delivery, but also in meeting the overall goals of the organisation. So what I want to do in this presentation is to share with you some of the latest thinking, some of the new ideas around risk management, and for you to then compare some of these ideas with your own approach and your own thinking, and then maybe you can use some of those ideas in the way that you're running your organisation and helping to deliver the very good work that you do around the world. So let me start with an assessment of, or some description of where we are to start with. And Nicholas has here copies of the slides, so instead of taking lots of notes, will you hand them out now? Okay, so these are coming around for you to refer to as we go. So in terms of risk management in projects, Risk Doctor and Partners works in lots of different types of risk. So we look at environmental risk, reputation risk, financial risk, counter-terrorism, fraud, all projects and programs, of course. Lots of different types of risk. But we're going to focus today on risk in projects. And project risk management has a very long history. It's been going formally for about 30 years. It started in the oil and gas sector, spread to the defence sector, then to construction and IT, and has now become very widely accepted and is implemented in all sorts of different organisations and industries around the world. There is a standard, an international standard for risk management, ISO 31000, and there are other specific standards in the project area. There are professional bodies. There's an Institute of Risk Management, and there are other professional bodies supporting risk management in the project arena. There's a good body of knowledge where people understand what we have to do in order to manage risk. There's good agreement on the approach and the techniques and so on. And then the infrastructure in terms of tools, training, consultancies, all of the things, academic courses and so on that you would expect to support risk management in projects. So it's quite well established, and some people are saying that it's a profession, or maybe not. So this slide here, some people think that risk people are just a bunch of cowboys, and actually what we're trying to do is to scare people into giving us money or giving us attention, and we tell them, you know, if it ain't broke, well, we'll fix it. And we're scaring them with all these things that might never happen, and then they worry about them, and then they spend time thinking about them, and they don't happen. Well, that might just be a complete waste of time. And how do we know that we're actually helping and adding value? And not just doing this, when you go to the risk department and they just say, well, be careful, you know, it's a nasty world out there, lots of things could go wrong, you really have to mind how you go. We can do a lot better than that. We should do a lot better than that, because risk management is supposed to help us. It's very widely accepted, as I say, with good consensus on the basics and commonly practiced right around the world, pretty much in every industry sector, all project types and most countries. So then we should think everything's fine, okay? If we've had risk management for projects for decades and everybody's doing it and we all know how to do it, then clearly everything is going to be sorted and we don't have any problems with any of our projects anywhere around the world. Is that true? There's some research done by a group called the Standish Group in America, and they research project success and failure and have been doing so since 1994, and looking to see what proportion of projects deliver all of their objectives, and we can say that they've succeeded, what proportion fail and they deliver none of their objectives, and what proportion are challenged, which means they succeed in some areas but they fail in others. And this is the data on this slide, and you'll see I plotted it really for the last 15 years, and really nothing much has changed. There's a little bit of up and down, but here we are now where 1/5 of our projects completely fail. These are projects of all industry types right around the world. Only just over 1/3 succeed and nearly half are challenged. This is not very good. We haven't made a lot of progress in the last 15 years, but risk management is supposed to help. Risk management is supposed to be, as I said in the beginning, the difference between success and failure. And there are some very good reasons for that. We know that life is risky, life is uncertain, with things like climate change and demographics and politics and technology and new diseases, all sorts of things that bring uncertainty into life. Projects are particularly risky when we're trying to do something unique in challenging circumstances with lots of different constraints and requirements and limited resources. And projects are risky, risk must be managed. So risk management should help to deal with that. One of the things we'll see in about 5 minutes or so is that there's a very close link between risk and objectives. Objectives are the things which are at risk, and risk management is about focusing on those objectives so we understand the things that could affect how well we can achieve them. And so that emphasis on objectives should be helpful, reminding us always through the risk process, what are we trying to do here? Risk management is about being proactive, doing things in advance, not waiting for it to go wrong and trying to fix it, but actually looking ahead with a forward-looking radar that scans the future and says, what's out there? What's coming my way? Where are the big bad things that I should avoid? And where should I steer towards? So being proactive should help because it creates space for us to manage, time for us to think, time for us to develop a proper response instead of just reacting to what comes to us. And it should help us to focus on the main things, the most important things to deal with. We're all far too busy. We all have too many things to think about. But risk management should focus us on those things which make a difference. The things which, if we don't manage, we'll fail. If we do manage, we'll succeed. It's that focus of all the things we need to do, we ought to be managing the risks. So these are the reasons that risk management should help. But projects just keep failing. Why is that? Is there something wrong with risk management? Is it something wrong with the idea, or with the process, or with the way that we're implementing it? Well, I'd like to suggest that although we've been doing it for a very long time, there are still things that we can learn, things that we could improve and do better in these three important areas: in the area of principles, in the area of process, and in the area of people. I wonder if I could ask you just to draw the curtain across here where it's shining onto the screen. Thank you. So what I want to address here is the way that we think about risk, the principles, the way that we act towards risk through the process, and the way that our psychology, our kind of beliefs and attitudes about risk in the people side. Because in each of these three important areas, I think there are still things that we can do better. So let me start with risk principles. I'm going to look at these four words here: uncertainty, risk, threat, and opportunity, and try and clarify how the four things relate together. So let's start with a definition. I guess we know what the word risk means, right? If we went round the room and we said, would you please just tell me, how do you define it? And maybe you define it in some of these kinds of terms, with pictures like this. You know, it's facing some big ugly thing which is, you know, it's going to squash us. Some situation where we're exposed to harm or danger, like this poor guy. Would you want this job here that this guy's got in the middle? I don't think so. We have this view, this kind of feeling about what risk is. But actually, it could be something different. So let me start with very first principles. Is risk the same as uncertainty? All risks are uncertain, but not all uncertainties are risks. So how do we tell the difference? There are millions, billions of risks in the world, of uncertainties in the world. If you think about all the things that might change, that might go wrong, that might be different, right around the world, in every situation, there's an infinite number of them. So which ones do we choose to put in our risk register? Which ones do we need to know about, to focus on, to try and respond to? It's obviously not all of them. We need some subset of the uncertainties, which we're going to call risks. But which ones? If we say that these two are not the same, how do we separate them? There is a mathematical distinction, which is to do with generation of random numbers from known and unknown probability density functions. Does that help? Not really. There's a philosophical distinction, different types of knowledge. We call them epistemic, aleatoric, and ontological. Does that help? Not really. Let's try a much more simple distinction. I would use three words to describe what really is a risk. And it's these three words here. Risk is uncertainty that matters. Because there are uncertainties that don't matter. Things that could happen somewhere in the world that we don't care about. So, is it going to rain in London tomorrow afternoon? I don't know, and I don't care. I'm not in London, it doesn't affect me, it has nothing to do with anything that I'm interested in. I'm here in Stockholm, and so are you, and so we're not bothered. It's an uncertainty that doesn't matter. But if you were in London tomorrow, you were travelling over and you had a meeting there, and you would want to know what clothes to take and whether you could walk from the station to your office, maybe whether or not it's going to rain would be relevant to you. How do you know what matters? Uncertainty that matters is risk, but what matters? What matters is linked to our objectives. The objectives define what matters for us. So we have things like delivering value. We have things like financial stability. We have things like preventing corruption. We have all of our development goals. We have our project goals. We have our organisation goals. These are the things that matter. These are our objectives. And risks are any uncertainty that, if it happened, could affect one of those. So what's the exchange rate between the Russian ruble and the Chinese yen in 2020? Don't know, don't care. It doesn't matter. It's not a risk on my risk register, unless you happen to be working in those two countries with a 10-year timescale. And then maybe you do need to know. One of the things that comes out of this, which we'll come back to a little later, is that different things matter to different people. And so we have the idea of levels of risk, just like we have levels of objectives. So CEDA has organisational objectives, which matters to the organisation as a whole. And maybe for some of you as managers, they matter to you. And then we implement our organisational objectives through projects and programmes. And they have their own separate objectives. And those those matter to the controllers on the ground, to the people in location, in country. And like there's a link between high-level strategic objectives and detailed delivery and project objectives, in the same way there's a link between strategic risk and project risk, but they're not the same. And different people need to manage them. The ownership of risk goes with the objectives. So whoever owns one of these things, an objective, also owns the uncertainties that matter to that objective. So we have to recognise that different things matter to different people, we have different objectives, and that means we have to manage our own risks, the uncertainties that matter to us and our objectives. So risk management is not a job for the specialist, it's not a job for some risk management person, it's a job for all of us who have objectives, which is all of us, right? So uncertainty that matters is the starting point for our definition of risk. And if we wanted a formal definition that uses those ideas, connecting uncertainty with objectives, the ISO standard, ISO 31000, which was issued just 2 years ago, uses these 6 words here. Risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives. Very neat. Just ties those concepts together. All of the other standards say the same kind of thing. Here's one that we use in the UK. The APM is the Association for Project Management. And we have a risk guide, the Project Risk Analysis and Management Guide, the PRAM guide, and a body of knowledge. And our definition is like the ISO standard, but just with more words. It's an uncertainty that can have an effect on achievement of objectives. So there we have that idea of uncertainty that matters embodied in our definitions. Now, let's ask the question a little further. Let's explore this idea of what matters. What effect are we interested in? What kinds of uncertainties are really risks? Here we've got a mouse, and he's looking at a nasty, uncertain situation here. And my question to you is, what uncertainties matter to this mouse? Now, clearly, he's noticed there's a trap. And so he's prepared for the trap. He's seen that there's a potential negative outcome. He could be killed or injured. So he's put his little helmet on, and he's got prepared. Very good, well done, the mouse. And we should do that in our organisation and in our projects and programmes. We should look for the traps and prepare for them and try and avoid them or minimise them. And so things which could destroy value, which could hurt people, which could waste money, we should be looking for those things and avoiding them and minimising them. Of course. Is there any other uncertainty that matters? Because the cheese, getting the cheese off the trap is not certain. He hopes he can, but he might not be able to. And so what he's also got to do, as well as managing the uncertainty with a negative outcome, don't let the trap go, he's also got to manage an uncertainty with a positive outcome. Can I get the cheese? And he actually has to do both at the same time. So in order to succeed, our mouse has to get the cheese and not spring the trap. If he just does one of those and not the other, then he's failed. If he gets the cheese, and then the trap springs and he's killed or injured, then he's failed. And if he doesn't get the cheese, but he doesn't spring the trap, he's also failed. Now, what has this got to do with CEDA and with projects and programs? What's cheese? What's cheese in our organisation or in our projects? Cheese is the benefit. Cheese is the value. Cheese is what we're trying to deliver on the ground through our organisation and through our projects and programs. Cheese is what it's all about. But along with the cheese, there are traps. And the cheese is not certain either. We don't know we're going to create these benefits or this value. We hope we can. And the real challenge for us as an organisation and for our project and programme teams is to get the cheese, create the benefits and the value, and at the same time not spring the trap. not damage reputation, not hurt people, not waste money. So we have to do both of these things, traps and cheese. There are uncertainties that matter because they could have a negative effect, they could hurt us. But there are also uncertainties that matter because they could have a positive effect and help us. Both of these matter and both of these need to be managed. So we don't want to just walk through the basement with our eyes closed and walk into a trap, of course. But we also don't want to walk through the basement with our eyes closed and miss a nice big piece of cheese. We have to see the traps and avoid them, see the cheese and get it. Now, okay, this is a bit of a kind of an odd illustration, I think, but it's true that there are uncertainties that matter in both directions. And we could manage them both. In fact, we could manage them both through the risk process, if risk management is for uncertainties that matter. So if we go back to our definition, and we look at the definition used by the Project Management Institute, which is the biggest project management professional body in the world. We have 380,000 members in 196 countries, and we have a body of knowledge with a risk management chapter. And this is the definition of risk in the PMBOK, the PMI body of knowledge risk chapter. It's the same as the others. An uncertain event or condition that, if it occurs, affects an objective. But PMI has thought about cheese as well as traps and put that into the definition. Well, we didn't put cheese and traps, of course, but we did put these three words: an uncertain event or condition that, if it occurs, has a positive or negative effect on achievement of an objective. So we have this idea that risk is a double-sided concept. There are bad risks, sure, uncertain things in the future that might or might not happen. If they happen, they're bad for us. We call those threats. But there are also uncertainties in the future that might or might not happen. If they do happen, we're pleased about that. We want those things to happen. We call them opportunities. And both of those things come under the heading of uncertainty that matters, or risk. And it's not just PMI who says this. We have the same statement in the ISO standard, which says that risk is the effect of uncertainty on objectives, with a footnote: effect could be positive or negative. And the same with the Association for Project Management. All of these standards are recognizing there are two types of risk, good ones as well as bad ones, and we need to manage them both. And best practice risk management around the world, with organizations who are interested in managing risk for commercial benefit, is implementing this approach, using a single integrated risk process to maximize value, to create as many benefits as possible, to enhance performance, enhance reputation, enhance productivity, all of that cheese, as well as avoiding overruns, avoiding being late, avoiding reputation damage, and so on. It's about working faster, smarter, cheaper, which is the cheese, as well as avoiding rework and waste and all of those bad things. Why wouldn't you do that if you could find a single process that would do both? And a lot of the commercial organisations that I work with, from NASA, BP and Rolls-Royce, and sort of the big people, down to small village elders doing microfinancing projects in Ghana, or community development work in South Africa, where I work in some of the townships, applying exactly this. How can we create benefits? Is there a structured process that will help us, as well as stopping things going wrong? Okay, so here's a first idea and a challenge to us about the principles of risk. How do we think about risk? Is risk bad? Is risk something we want to avoid and minimise at all costs, get it out of our organisation, out of our projects? Or is there something about risk that, if we embrace it, if we exploit it, we can create additional value? And the answer is both. Interesting. Now let me ask another question about principles of risk, and something which you might not have thought of. And it's this question: is risk the same as risks? Well, you might say that's a silly question. One is singular, one is plural. It's just the same thing. Let me ask it in a different way. How does the organisation or the project sponsor see risk in the project? all of those external stakeholders see risk in a different way from the project manager or the project controller. So if we ask this question, how risky is your project? How do you answer that question? What's the answer? What units do we use? What language? It's not the same as, what are the risks? What is the risk of the project is different from, what are the risks in the project? It's the risk of the project and the risks in the project. Now, it may seem a small difference, but it's really important, because the answer to this question, how risky is the project, is not adding up all the risks. There's something different. There's some other concept which we need to grab hold of, which we need to understand, which is, we might call it overall project risk, the risk exposure of the whole project, which is not the same as adding up all of the little risks within the project. So how do we answer this question? It's a very important question. And as managers, you should be asking that question. What answer are you expecting? Is the answer 7 on a scale of 1 to 10? Is it red, yellow, green? Is it high, medium, low? What does it mean? How do we answer the question? Both of the professional bodies that I mentioned, APM in the UK and the Project Management Institute, have been thinking about this, and they've got some definitions. This says that project risk is the overall exposure of stakeholders to the consequences of variation in outcome. So if the project is more or less productive, it creates more or fewer benefits, then that is the overall risk exposure of the stakeholders to the variation of the project. And PMI says exactly the same thing, the effect of uncertainty on the project as a whole, more than the sum of the individual risks on a project. So what we have to do is to have some sort of approach, some way of thinking about this other level of risk. We need a way of understanding it, we need a way of describing it. This is a valid question for the project manager or for the project controller to answer. How risky is your project? How well are you managing the risk of your project? Not just how are you managing the individual risks in it. And so we need a language to describe it. We need a process to deal with it. We need some sort of techniques to identify, assess, and respond to overall project risk. And this is part of the project risk management challenge. So my question to you would be, do you think about risk like this? The first question is, do you think about risk being positive as well as negative? The second is, do you think about risk as an overall concept for your projects, as well as individual things that might happen? Here's one way of thinking about the difference between the two. We might say that implicit, sort of internal risk management, is thinking about the structure of our project, what's in it, the scope, the content, and the context. And we make decisions about those things. What shall we put in the project? How shall we run the project in order to manage the overall risk of the project? It's the scoping decisions, the bid controlling decisions, the context decisions, the management decisions, actually. And then explicit risk management with a process is for dealing with individual risk items within the project. So as managers, you'll have other people to do this. This is what your project people do. But you need to be doing this, thinking about the decisions of what's in my project, and should I be changing the scope or changing the context, and modifying the way that we manage this project within the overall portfolio. It's a different challenge because it's a different type of risk. Does that make sense? Lots of nods, that's good. Okay, so in terms of principles, and this is the first of the 3 areas that I said I'd talk about, the first thing is, if risk is uncertainty that matters, and we link it to our objectives, there are 2 types of risk, bad ones and good ones. And both of those need to be managed. And also, we've got this idea of a higher level of risk, which we might call overall risk, overall project risk, which also needs to be managed in a proactive way. And the challenge for us is to say, well, is that the way we think about risk? Is that the way our approach works? Do we handle these things in our approach? If not, why not? And if you think this would be a good thing to do, what changes do you need to make in order to put some of these things into practice. Now, I'm going to be talking to the controllers tomorrow and spending a day with them exploring some ways in a masterclass of doing risk management better. And we will be thinking about some of these ideas of managing opportunities through the process, for example. How do you identify opportunities? How do you find the good ones? How do you exploit them through a risk process? So we will be talking in more detail about that tomorrow, but for you, that's all I'm going to say. There are some more details, obviously, available in books and articles and so on. Okay, are you happy with that? All right, we can take questions at the end. I'll move on to my second area, and that's the area of process. Now, process is not very exciting, but process is important. Here we've got a picture of someone who knows what the starting conditions are, and they know where they want to get to. The difficult bit is in the middle. And all of our projects are like that, and we kind of hope that some miracle occurs in the middle of our project, so that with all the mess that we start with unclear requirements and competing constraints and not enough resources and all of that stuff that we have to live with, then some miracle happens and we get to the end. And this is where risk management should help. This is where we need the detail. The thinking is in the middle, right? We understand where we are, we usually understand where we want to get to. It's all of that mess in the middle that we have to cope with. So what does a risk process look like? Here's a fairly typical risk process. It comes from the Project Management Institute, the PMI. It has these 6 steps. It doesn't start with identifying the risk. That is not the first thing. The first thing is some kind of planning step, some setup step. Because before we can identify the risks, we have to be clear about our objectives, because those are the things which are at risk. So we have our objectives, we understand the scope, the content of those objectives, the context, all of those explicit decisions which I talked about. Once we have clear objectives, then we can identify the risks, both bad ones and good ones. Then we have some assessment step, because not all of these risks will be equally important. So we need to analyse them. Qualitatively, that means describing the qualities of the risk. We put those things, the characteristics of the risk, in a risk register. We may want to use some sort of simulation, a quantitative analysis step. This is optional in order to understand the overall exposure of the project. Once we know which are our big risks, because we've prioritised and analysed them, then we develop some responses. And then we have a review step, and we go around again. Because risk is constantly changing, so we need a cyclic, repeated process. I guess your process is similar to that. It may have fewer steps, it may combine some of these things, may use slightly different language, but all the processes look similar to that. Identify, analyse, plan and manage. Well, we're so familiar with this process that we don't see what's wrong with it. And I've given a presentation like this to people in the Project Management Institute, for example, and asked this question, what's wrong with your process? And they're completely blind. They can't see anything wrong with that process. It's a perfect process. Everybody's process is the same. What could possibly be wrong with this process? I think there are at least 2 things wrong with the process. In fact, I think there are 3, but we'll talk about 2 just now. I wonder if you can spot at least one of them. Well, one of them is in this kind of area in the top left-hand side. And you're nodding. What do you think it is?
Implementation.
Implementation, very good. It's exactly in here. We plan, and then we monitor. Where do we do anything? And that's something that people don't think about. They say, yes, we plan our responses, we record those in our risk register, then we put the risk register on the shelf, and 1 month later we come back and take the risk register off the shelf, and we update it. And in between, well, we just carried on with the project and we did what we were going to do and nothing changed. Well, what was the point of that? That was a complete waste of time if your analysis doesn't turn into action. But there's nowhere in the process between planning a response and then monitoring your risk exposure. So I think we should have a separate implementation step. What the PMI and other professional bodies say is that, well, what we do is we put our planned responses into the routine project management process and we manage it that way. But I think there's a real danger that we forget to do what we said we would do. And here's a little riddle to illustrate the point. A very simple riddle, a simple story, and you have to answer the question at the end. So the story goes like this, very simply. There are 5 frogs sitting on a log, and 4 decide to jump off. So how many frogs are on the log? And the answer is 5, because
No implementation.
they just decided, exactly. And deciding and doing are very different things. And that's the problem in our risk process, that we can identify risks, we can analyse risks, we can describe and record risks, and even make decisions about how to handle them. But the decisions don't change anything. If we have everything decided and no action, it's a waste of time. We're sitting on the log, floating down the river, crocodiles all around us, in the swamp, and we're ready to go over the waterfall. And we think, I've managed all my risks because I wrote them in the risk register. Well, it's not good enough. What we need to do is take action to actually do what we said we would do, and then monitor and see if it worked, and see if the responses are giving us the change that we need, and whether our process is being effective. And if not, do something else. So what we need to do is to get the frogs off the log. We actually have to jump, otherwise nothing changes. And as I say, the worst thing is that we kid ourselves, we pretend or we imagine that something has changed just because it is a real potential problem. And in the APM process, the Association for Project Management, after identify, assess, plan, here's an implement step. That's been added in explicitly. It's not in every process. I recommend it, because otherwise we might forget. Now, is there anything else wrong with this process? So we've added in implement, and then we go round with a review. Is there anything else that's wrong? Well, projects don't go on forever. Projects have an end, a beginning, a middle, and an end. Where does this process end? It goes round and round and round and round and round forever. And I think that's a real potential problem. There's no way out of the risk process. Projects finish, so the risk process should finish. And what we should have is some kind of final step when the project finishes where we stop and think, what happened? What did we do well? What did we not do well? What should we learn about how we manage risk on projects? The answer to people when you say there's no learning step, no post-project step in the risk process, is they say, well, we'll do that in our routine post-project review. Okay, if you have a routine post-project review, and most projects don't. This is an area that is done very badly. So we recommend that you should have a risk step at the end of the project that says, let's learn. Let's compare what actually happened with what we thought would happen. We could do it as part of the post-project review, or we might have a separate meeting. And what we're going to look for are the sorts of risks that come up all the time, the sorts of responses that work, how much it cost us and how much it saved us. And then use those results on the next project with our checklists and our strategy and our responses. So it's really important that we don't just keep repeating the same mistakes over and over and over again. So here's a process, another process. It's called the ATOM process, Active Threat and Opportunity Management. Again, very similar, initiation, identify, assess, respond, review, but with an implementation step here. And then once we've finished going round and the project finishes, we come out into a post-project review. I think it should be in there explicitly. We should say we need to stop and listen and think what happened and what can we learn. So process, not very exciting, but something we do need to think about. Two things people miss out in their processes are the step to do something and the step to learn something. And we should include both of those in our project process. So my challenge to you and to everybody else is, do you do this? Do you have an implementation step and a learning step? And if not, why not? And should you? And I'll leave that on the table for you to think about. I know you're developing and reviewing your risk process just now, so this may be a good time to ask that question. Okay, let me move to my last area, and that's the area of people. And people are very, very important. There's a saying that people are our most important asset. Most businesses will say that, most organisations say that. Very few act as if it's true. Most of us exploit our people. We call them human resources, just like they were desks or computers. We can move them around, and it's not the same. They are people. We are people. And when it comes to risk management, risk is not managed by computers or robots or processes, but risk is managed by people making choices, people making decisions, people taking actions. And people, as you know, are very complicated. We aren't just simple rational actors where you provide an input and the person does some kind of processing and then produces an output. We're not like that. We're very complex beings. We have psychology, we have emotions, we have all sorts of different things which can affect our behaviour, our choices, our decisions. And particularly when we're facing risk. When we're thinking about uncertainty, a whole set of psychology comes into play which we need to think about, which we need to be aware of. This is quite important. I call it ABC. Most of us are interested in culture. We're thinking about the sorts of cultures of our organisation, the sort of culture of our projects, the sorts of cultures that we want to develop in our delivery organisations. And where does culture come from? Culture arises from repeated behaviour. If you keep doing something in the same way long enough, it will become part of the culture. So this is who we are, this is how we behave. Who we are comes out of repeated behaviour. But where does behaviour come from? Behaviour comes from the way that you think. So the values that you hold, the attitudes that you hold, the way you understand something will lead to a behaviour which in turn will shape a culture. And these things are equally true of risk. If we want a risk-aware culture or a risk-mature culture, it will come from the way we behave towards risk in terms of our processes and our decision-making. And that behaviour comes from how we think about risk. Our attitude, our choices, our feelings, our view, our perception about risk. So we've got to get this right. If we don't get this right, we'll never get to the other end of a risk-mature culture. So let's think for 10 minutes about risk attitudes. I think risk attitude is a CSF. Now, you might know this term. CSF, in terms of risk management effectiveness, it means a critical success factor, which means that if we understand and manage the people side, we know how people feel, we know how people react and why, and we can manage that actively, we can intervene in the people side, it will make our risk process more effective. Because people are not making judgments that we don't understand, judgments that come out of biases that we can't see. We'll be more informed about the backgrounds of our people's judgment and perceptions, and that will help us to make better decisions. What happens if we don't know anything about risk attitude? If we just ignore the people side? If we say, risk management is a process, we'll just follow the steps of the process, we fill in the forms, we write the reports, and it's done. If we ignore this idea that people think about things and feel about things and believe about things in a way that affects their behaviour. If we ignore this, is it just neutral? I don't think it is. I think CSF could mean something else. It could mean that if we ignore and don't understand the people side, it becomes a critical source of failure for our risk process. Because we're making judgments that we don't understand, which are biased by things that we can't see. And so our judgments about risk will be wrong, which means that we take on too much risk, or not enough risk, which means that the actions that we choose are not appropriate and don't work, because we're not understanding where people are coming from. So risk attitude is really important for us to understand. People do all of the important things in the risk process. People decide how much risk is acceptable, and what the risks are, and how big they are, and what we should do about them, and then they implement those actions. And each of those steps is affected by the way they think about risk. You see, some people are worried about risk. It frightens them, it makes them nervous and intimidated and cautious. And they think the right response to risk is to run away and hide, or at least to protect yourself. If you're one of those people, you will have a very low risk threshold. You don't like risk. And you will identify lots of threats and no opportunities. You will think the threats are large and the opportunities are small, and want to be aggressive in order to eliminate as many threats as possible, if you're frightened by risk or it makes you nervous. Now, some people are different. Some people actually enjoy risk. Some people say, well, this is good. I'm going to roll my sleeves up and see what I can do here. I'm going to be challenged by this risk. I'm going to prove myself. I'm going to beat it. And they want to exploit and embrace the risk, because that's what makes life interesting and exciting. Without risk, life's boring, right? So then we have a much higher risk threshold, and we look for opportunities, and we think the opportunities are big and the threats are small, and we want to chase the opportunities and ignore the threats. You see, the behaviour is completely different based on how we think about risk. So how do people think about risk? If we wanted to sketch out, to draw a picture of what risk attitude might look like, here's one attempt to do it. So we've got an up side, which is about people who are comfortable with uncertainty. They like it, they think it's positive. And we have a downside where people are negative. People are worried and nervous and intimidated and frightened. And if we took the same risky situation, different people would respond in different ways. So here's a sketch of what they might respond like. Individuals could be anywhere on this curve with the same risk. So supposing we said, what we're going to do is find the highest building in Stockholm, and after lunch we're all going to go and abseil down the side, get some ropes and we'll lower ourselves down and we'll take some photographs on the way down, and that'll be a really good sort of team building exercise. We'll all have some fun just going down the side of the highest building in Stockholm. Who wants to do that? And some people are going, absolutely not. I think that's a stupid idea. I'm not going. I'll take the photographs. I'll hold the coats. I'm not going to do that. Some people are saying, that's fantastic. What a great idea. Really good. Let's go now. Much more interesting than this. And other people are saying, well, I don't really have any strong views. Maybe, maybe not. It could be interesting. So with the same uncertain situation, different people position themselves in different ways. How would you invest for your pension? Oh, very careful. I put the money under the bed. No, I'm going to put it all in French stocks. Oh, really? Or how about Greek stocks? Or, well, I'm not quite sure. I'll take some advice. So different decisions are in different places. Okay? Now, we have a whole range of possible positions on here. It is quite helpful to divide this graph into areas so that we can talk about it. People who have a negative response, who say, oh, risk, I'm not so sure about that, or, horrible, no, I don't want it, that's what we call risk averse. People who say, oh, that's quite interesting, that's quite nice, or fantastic, bring it on, that's what we call risk seeking. And the people who have no strong response, who just say, yeah, risk, that's normal, then we call those risk tolerant. Okay? Now, I'm going to have two questions for you. You've been looking at this picture for a couple of minutes. The first question is this. On this picture, where are you? You don't have to tell me, but could you just go X marks, this is me. And what's interesting is, if you think about it for more than a minute, the answer is, well, I can't just put an X because I need some more information. Are we talking about going down the side of the building? Are we talking about investing in my pension? Are we talking about starting a new project? Are we talking about bringing up my children? Are we talking about what? What is it? Because for different situations, we could be in different places. You might find that bringing up your children, you're very cautious. And with your pension provision, you're extremely cautious. And then for your projects, you're taking a little bit of a risk. And for your hobbies, you're taking a lot of risk. So we could be in different places depending on the situation. So here's a more important question. To be a good manager in CEDA, where should you be? Where is the ideal manager on this graph? And the answer is, well, it depends. It depends what we're trying to do, doesn't it? If we're trying to launch some new project in a new country with a new development partner, maybe we need to just try some things outside the box that we've never tried before. If we've got some area of, which is affecting people's lives, which the reputation of the organisation is at stake, and we haven't got very much money, perhaps we need to be a bit more careful. So what that teaches us is something very important about risk attitude. The questions, where are you, it depends on the situation we're talking about and how we feel about it. And the question, where should you be, depends on what you're trying to achieve. That tells you something very important. It tells you, first of all, that risk attitude is variable. It's not fixed. It's not, I am always like this. Every situation I am, that's not true. We're not the victim of our risk attitudes. It moves. Now, if it moves, we could choose it. Some of those things we do choose. How we invest our pension, how we bring up our children, how we develop our career. If we can choose it, we can manage it. We can take decisions to change it. That's interesting. But how? How could you manage something which is in here? Well, let me suggest a simple stepwise approach. There's a lot of research behind this, and Nicholas mentioned I've written a few books. 2 of them are on this subject, and one of them is with this lady, Ruth Murray Webster, and we've developed a model which helps people to manage their internal approach or attitude to risk. And it's based on emotional intelligence, but it applies some of those ideas in a slightly different way. So it starts with awareness and appreciation. What's going on and why? So first of all, what is my risk attitude? Am I being cautious? Am I being tolerant? Am I being risk-taking? And why? Where did that come from? Has that come from my background? Has it come from some previous bad experience? Has it come from the circumstances which are very challenging? Am I just having a bad day today? What's happening? What's going on in terms of my attitude, and how is that affecting my behaviour? And what's that doing for the culture that I'm developing? And I could do this for myself, and leaders and managers should do that. We should be self-aware and understand how we feel about uncertainty and what that's doing for our behaviour. But we can also do it for our teams. How are they feeling? What behaviour are they displaying, and why? Once we know what's going on, then we can assess it. We can say, is this okay? Is this helping us to achieve our goals or not? And if it's not okay, we better do something. And in terms of emotional intelligence, we call this assertion and action. Saying that we need to change, making the case for change, putting that out there so people understand, and then doing something. But what happens if we assess that our current position is okay? Our initial kind of gut reaction is leading us in the right direction. Then we can just accept it. We say, that's fine. Let's go with that and monitor it and make sure it stays okay. So here you've got a very simple process which says, what's going on? Is it appropriate? If not, change it. If it is, go with it, but monitor it to make sure that it stays right. A very simple process for managing attitudes. So we can do that. It's not just something that we're stuck with. We have the attitude we have and we can't do anything about it. So in terms of people, this is an area that most organisations forget about. They forget, they say, yes, people are our most important asset, but they don't know how to manage the people side of the risk process. There are 3 things here. One is to know that something is going on, and I'm trying to raise awareness in this session here. The second is to know what it is that's going on, and the third is to do something about it. And the question for us is, are we doing that? Are we managing risk attitudes of ourselves and of our teams? If not, why not? And should we? Okay, well, I realise I've said a lot of things, a huge number of things in the last few minutes. And I hope you found them interesting and challenging. But the important thing is that risk management is very important. It is the thing that makes the difference between success and failure. And although we've been doing it for a very long time, there are some areas where we could do it better. What we need are people who are going to break out of the box, to do things differently, not just to follow the way it's always been done. This is a picture of somebody, it's actually a film actor, but one of the American pioneers, Davy Crockett, who pioneered the Western frontier. And this is, well, I'm sure you know who this is, one of the most iconic pictures in the world, most instantly recognisable, Che Guevara, a pioneer and a rebel. Somebody who's going to go where nobody else has been before, somebody who's going to break the rules. What we need is people to do that, people to say, you know what, risk management isn't working for us. So what are we going to do? We're going to do something different. If it means breaking some rules, I'm going to do that, because my projects are so important that they need to succeed. Let me finish with two quotes. One is nearly a quote from Einstein. Einstein said that insanity is doing the same thing and expecting a different result. I think what he meant was this: if you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got. And I think that's crazy. If risk management isn't good enough for you, don't keep doing it. Do something different. But then a quote from this wonderful man here, Gandhi, and he said something which is much bigger than just risk management, but it applies to our challenge as well. And what he said was this: you must be the change you wish to see in the world. We can't rely on somebody else to do it for us. These are my projects, these are my objectives, I have to manage the risk, and I have to make sure I do it effectively. Well, I hope you found these ideas interesting and challenging. There is a book which includes some of these things, and I'm leaving a copy here for you, which will be somewhere in the organisation with my compliments. But I'm happy to take questions and talk about some of those things in more detail, and I'm here for today and tomorrow as well, if you want to talk more informally. So, are there any comments or questions? Stunned silence.
I have one. Could I just ask if you could repeat the question?
Of course.
So,
well, since you worked over 20 years with this, you have also come across the previous trend with the log frame process, which we all got through. And the log frame, the log frame put the objectives first, and then we turned them around and we looked at risks and opportunities and resources, and we tried to, you know, to get a critical thought. And what we identified very quickly was that we can't do this ourselves. We need to share the log frame with those whom we create development with, our development partners. So in that respect, I would ask you, do you see a risk that we, with these concepts, attend too much to the risk bit of it, and we attend too little to the objective side of it? And secondly, is there a risk for us to deal with risk in a confined way, because there is a push for that, while we need to manage risk together with others?
Yes. Okay, so just to summarise, and thank you for the background, that's very useful. The use of the log frame process gives you a structured way of dealing with things, starting from the objectives and ending with the risks. And so your question was, does that take us too far away from the objectives and we're just dealing with the risks? And the other is that it's an internal process that we manage in a standard way within the organisation and within our projects, should we be involving our development partners and other stakeholders. Okay, so the first question, in terms of focusing on the risks and not the objectives, I think that's fine, because a risk is an uncertainty that affects objectives. So by focusing on the risk, you are focusing on the objective. So when you say, you know, this particular government may not provide the resources that we expect, that's the risk. Well, why does that matter? It matters because if they don't, then we can't put this particular facility in place in order to meet the objectives of the project. So we judge the lack of resources from the government. The importance of that is judged against the objectives in order to build the facility. So everything goes back to objectives at the end of the day. And I think focusing on the risk will focus you on the objectives. That's why the risk matters. In the second question, doing it in a standardised way within the organisation, I think we really must involve our stakeholders, because they have a good view of risks on the ground, of risks in the wider stakeholder network, our suppliers, our sponsors, the government. All of these people have a view of the uncertainties that could affect our projects and the whole organisation. And if we don't take that view into account, then we're missing some of the uncertainties that matter. Now, some people say we should only manage the risks that we can manage, the ones that we can influence and affect. And how can I affect government policy, or how can I affect some third-party organisation? I don't think you should only identify the risks that you can manage. I think we need to identify all of the risks, including the ones we can't, because those might well be the ones that affect us the most. Then we can prepare for them, we can have contingency plans. Maybe we find we can do something to affect them by lobbying or partnership or communication or sharing information, that sort of thing. So I think involving the wider stakeholders in the risk process is very important, including the in-country locals, especially in-country locals. Is there another question?
Det behövs
There's a
inte,
question
för det
coming.
är ingen som är med.
Telefon.
Men den där kommer inte höras i högtalaren.
Okay.
Okay, then I don't use it. Thank you, it was very interesting. Some may believe that I'm talking about SIDA now, but I'm not. But in a situation where you have an organization that is very much focused on what is called internal control. Internal control, risk management, but with I think many with a perception of controlling, which means minimizing the risk, and at the same time having a requirement or expectations on becoming more.
We're just taking a question from within the room. I'll repeat the question in a moment.
Yeah, becoming more innovative, creative, trying things. I mean, how do you as an organization manage that? Because it goes down to the risk attitude, culture of the organization. Yes. And how do you change that from being very much focused on the control side to moving over?
Let me try and repeat the question shorter for the people who are listening on the telephone. So in CWE or in other organisations, there's a strong focus on internal control, and the danger is that the control element of that is about closing down variation or variability, and at the same time we're under pressure to be innovative and creative and use our resources in the best possible way. So is there a conflict between the two? There was a very interesting experiment done with Formula One cars about 15 years ago, where there were lots of accidents with the Formula One cars. And so what they did was they changed the specification of the car, and they made the brakes more efficient, and they tightened up the chassis, so the whole of the car performed better, and it was safer. And then they introduced this across Formula One, and all the drivers had better brakes and a more rigid chassis, and there were more accidents. More accidents because the car was safer. And they asked the drivers, why are you having more accidents? And they said, because the car is so safe, I can now go much faster into the bend, brake later, steer tighter, and then they over-judged it and they had more accidents. So they reversed the specification change in the cars, made the brakes softer, loosened up the chassis, the whole car was a little bit more variable, and the drivers were more careful and there were less accidents. Now, the purpose of internal control is to give us brakes. Brakes allow you to drive faster. If you imagine driving your Volvo or your Saab with no brakes, you would just creep along and you kind of hope after, at 10 kilometers an hour you kind of stopped, hopefully. Brakes say I can go at 100 kilometres an hour and then stop. Internal control of the brakes. What they are saying is we're going to give assurance that this system is working. We're going to check to make sure that people are giving you good information, that people are being honest, that the assessments are valid, that we're acting on the things we said we would, and then within that framework you can be as free as you like in terms of innovation and creativity. So I think the danger is, or the mistake is, misuse of internal control. That we shouldn't be afraid of it. If the internal auditors say, this process is working, then I'm going to put my foot on the accelerator. If the risk process is helping, then I'm going to take more risks, because now I know it's safe. I'm getting good information, and there will be the early warning indicator if I'm about to hit the wall or go into a bend too fast. So I think internal control should be helping us to be innovative and creative, not stopping us. But that is, as you say, an attitude thing. If we see them as our enemies, then we'll stop when they come. They're not police, they're helpers. Any other questions? Any questions from the telephone? No? Okay. There's a question in the room, yes.
Yeah, my question refers to the change in the perception of risk over the last decade, particularly after 9/11, and the way that risk is now a focus area in climate negotiations and so on. We look at the insurers, the reinsurers and so on, who have a completely, that job is changing. What would you say about that?
I don't know a lot about reinsurance. I'm having lunch with somebody at Swiss Re on Thursday. I did a little work with Munich Re about 2 or 3 years ago. But I think with every big event, there's an overreaction, and then we kind of settle back to a more realistic response. And so I think with 9/11, with the Icelandic volcano, with SARS, the respiratory disease that came from China to Canada, every one of those resulted in an overreaction. I flew on the 12th of September 2001 from London to Brussels, and it was the safest flight I've ever had, because all the terrorists were hiding in their caves, and all of the security was 10 times more vigilant, and it was the best possible time to fly, and the plane was empty, because everyone was afraid. And what happened in America, everyone stopped flying and took to their cars, and you can actually measure in the 12 months after 9/11, there were an extra 12,000 deaths on the road. 12,000 extra over the normal number of deaths. So the guys who killed 2,000 people in the World Trade Center, effectively another 12,000 people killed themselves because they were afraid of what happening again. And now that's kind of settled back to normal, and we're flying as before. So I'm not sure how that answers the question about insurance and reinsurance, but I think the risk people have got to be careful to stay realistic and not to become overreactive to individual events. These things are outliers, they're not typical, they don't happen every day or every week, and we should balance them into the overall picture, but not overemphasize it. That probably doesn't answer the question, does it? It's a difficult question.
Partly, thank you.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Yes. You talked about learning from experience, which I found, of course, that's necessary, but you also mentioned different stakeholders, different groups that are all sort of, they have different views on the risks, of course, because they are on the different sides of the projects and they have different experiences. And I was just wondering, when you say learning from experiences from the risks and say that what actually happened and what did you think happened, would that be different sort of workshops, different analyses from different groups, and in the end, whose opinion would count?
That's a very good question. I think it's the same group as launches a project. So who do you use to launch the project? Of course you have the project team, the project controller and the people who are doing the implementation. You would have a representative of the organisation, and presumably some representatives of external stakeholders, or at least somebody representing their view, even if they're not there. And I think we should have all of those views represented in our post-project learning as well, because each of them are important. So the way I conduct a post-project review is to go through the objectives. Was the objective achieved? What helped? What hindered? What should we do differently against each objective? And I think we have to be honest about that. If you just take the project team, very often they're not so honest. Because, you know, well, I did the project and I did my very best and it was really tough and I didn't have everything I needed. So, you know, you can't really say I failed because... And then you have the end user who's saying, yeah, but we didn't get our school, or we didn't get our water, water supply, and so you failed. And we're saying, you know, so we have to have all those perspectives, I think, and just listen, just take it on the chin. But everyone should have a place at the table.
But the last question, whose opinion would count? I mean,
they all count. I mean,
they all count. But if you say you're going to learn, and say if we sort of achieve the objective or not. I mean, if those opinions really are on two different levels, would that be the management? Or
no, see, I think that is a learning to say that you could have an outcome where somebody says it succeeded and somebody says it failed. Now we need to understand that. Why is that? How could you have in the same outcome such different perspectives? And it's probably because the objectives are different. So we thought they had the same objectives, but actually they had a different objective which we didn't meet, and they didn't tell us. And very often either sponsors or end users have other objectives. You know, we want to have our resources well used and to produce a facility or some sort of benefit on the ground, but there are other things. There are political needs, there are religious or social or community needs, which, you know, we're not doing that, but they have this in mind as well. And then we fail to meet that, well, we need to then put those things explicitly on the table at the beginning, and then we can be measured against them. But I think, you know, everybody's opinion at the end is really important, it's really valid. And if there are these big differences, we need to explore why they are. Yes, Oliver.
Thank you, David. I think this is very interesting, and I think it gets us very much encouraged to continue our work with risk analysis and risk management. We have all gone, I mean, at least at the department level, we have already gone through risk analysis work in relation to setting the objectives of the operational planning. And we have conducted several risk analysis workshops at the department level. And I think one of the experiences in organizing that is, except that we need to set our objectives better, because with fluffy risks, objectives, the risks tend to go out of hand. But I would just like to ask you if you have some techniques to think about as for in the process of risk identification. I think that would be very helpful for us and our way for us to be better.
All right. So the answer is yes. I mean, in terms of risk identification techniques, there are lots, probably about 12 or 15 all used, and we will train people in 2 of the different ones tomorrow. Most people use a brainstorm, just get people in a room and ask for their views. That's okay. Often it's very unstructured and you can't guarantee what you're going to get. So I recommend structuring a brainstorm using a risk breakdown structure. So a risk breakdown structure is like a work breakdown structure or a cost breakdown structure. It's a hierarchical view of different sources of risk. So we could say, where do risks come from? There are perhaps 4 sort of major areas. One would be technical risks, which vary depending on the specific type of project that we're doing. There are management risks, which are to do with our organisation, policy, resourcing, the way that we run it. This may not affect you, but there are often commercial risks in terms of our procurements, terms and conditions, liabilities, warranties, all of those things. And then you've got external sources of risk, like politics and the weather and pressure groups and regulation and so on. So then underneath each of these you'd have a set of lower level headings that say, well, What do we mean in this context by technical risk or management or commercial? So this might be processes, interfaces, safety, technology. This might be prioritization, resource planning, communication. This might be procurement, suppliers, contractual terms. This might be weather, politics, pressure groups. And what I would do is to use this as a shake, as a kind of outline for a brainstorm. Then you've got a checklist, so things that happened in the past, and again we could say, well, it happened before, could it happen now? Checklists are quite useful. One great technique is assumptions analysis, which is one that we'll talk about tomorrow. So every assumption you guess about the future, you hope this works out, and it might not. So assumptions, some of them are safe, and some of them are not. The ones which are unsafe are risks. Then we've got things like SWOT analysis. Strengths produce opportunities, weaknesses produce threats. You've got constraints analysis, which is the same as assumptions analysis. What are the things that are holding us back? What other techniques? I mean, there's lots of them. What I usually recommend is the first three, A, B, C, assumptions analysis, brainstorming, and a checklist. And the reason I do that is that the assumptions analysis is very specific to this project. What assumptions have we made here? Brainstorming is kind of open and free, and a checklist says what happened before. So you've got the very project specific, the very sort of completely free, creative, and then something which is learning from the past. And those three, I think, normally cover most things. Yeah. Okay, anything else? Okay,
Okay,
good.
thank you very much, David.